I sat at the edge of the table, hands clenched beneath the white linen, pretending to study the restaurant's candlelit menu while my heart hammered so loud I could barely hear anything else. The laughter from the next table pierced me like needles, his laughter. And hers. They sat not 10 feet away, completely unaware. I could see the back of his head, the way he leaned in, that charming tilt he always used when he was trying to impress someone. Only this time, it wasn't me on the receiving end. It was her. The woman he swore was just a friend from work. The waiter approached with a quiet, "Would you like anything to drink?" But I just shook my head, too focused on keeping my composure. I wasn't here to eat. I wasn't here to cry. I was here to end everything. How did I get here? That's a question I've asked myself every night for the last 6 months. You don't walk into a marriage expecting it to collapse. You build a life, a home, share dreams, make sacrifices, and you trust. You believe the late nights and vague explanations are just part of life, part of growth. You don't assume the man who kissed you goodnight for 11 years is also kissing someone else when he says he's working late. But ignorance has a shelf life. And mine had expired. It all started with a missed phone call. Funny, right? That's all it took. I'd borrowed his laptop to send an email while mine was updating, and a FaceTime call from Chelsea popped up in the corner of the screen. I didn't answer. I didn't need to. The contact photo said everything. It was a selfie of her in his t-shirt. Our t-shirt. The one he wore every Sunday while we watched movies in bed. At first, I thought I was imagining things. You make excuses because it hurts less than the truth. But then I started noticing the lies unraveling. Dinner receipts from places I'd never been. The smell of her perfume on his coat. The way he smiled at his phone like a teenager in love. So I did what any woman drowning in betrayal does. I cried in the bathroom. I screamed into pillows. I confronted him, and he gaslit me so well, I almost apologized. "You're overthinking," he said. "You're acting paranoid." He played the victim like a professional. But this time, I wasn't going to fold. I reached out to my cousin Taylor, sharp as a whip, and, thankfully, a divorce attorney. I told her everything. The messages I found. The dates. The hotel bookings. The nights he told me he was at conferences. Taylor didn't flinch. She just said, "We're going to hit him where it hurts." She helped me gather every ounce of evidence. I became an actress in my own life, playing the clueless wife while secretly collecting screenshots, bank statements, and text records. I learned how to smile through the ache, laugh through the resentment. And as much as it killed me, I even packed his lunches while imagining handing him the papers that would change everything. But I didn't want it to end with silence. I wanted a moment, a reckoning. So when Taylor found out they had a dinner reservation at La Verona, the same place he took me on our anniversary 3 years ago, I booked the table right across from them. I wasn't coming alone either. Taylor was with me, briefcase in hand, heels clicking like gunfire across the marble floor. And behind us was someone he'd never expect, his boss, Mr. Langford. You see, Chelsea wasn't just any woman. She was a subordinate at his firm. And dating her? Grounds for termination, not to mention professional disgrace. Taylor said the optics would be devastating, especially with the proof we had. And Mr. Langford, a no-nonsense man with a strict ethics policy, had agreed to be there after I anonymously tipped him off. I took a slow breath and signaled to the waiter. "Now," I whispered. He walked across the room and stopped at their table. My husband looked up, mid-laugh, and his face went pale when he saw the man behind him. Chelsea's eyes darted in confusion until she turned and saw me. I stood up slowly, napkin falling to the floor. Taylor followed, opening her briefcase like it was choreography. The restaurant went silent. Even the violinist in the corner stopped playing. I walked straight to their table and set the manila envelope down between their wine glasses. "You forgot our anniversary," I said, voice calm but deadly. "So, I thought I'd bring the gift to you." His mouth opened, but no sound came out. Chelsea blinked like a deer in headlights. Mr. Langford stepped forward, eyes hard. Daniel, I think we need to have a very serious conversation. In private. And then I turned around and walked out. The silence behind me was deafening. In the weeks before that dinner, my days blurred into a strange mixture of numbness and razor-sharp awareness. I moved through the motions, waking up, brewing coffee, getting dressed, like someone acting out the role of happy wife on a stage with no audience. But behind every small task, there was a growing tension under my skin, like a kettle slowly approaching a boil. And I knew, deep down, something inside me had changed forever. My name is Lena Wallace, 38, graphic designer, wife, or, I guess, former wife-to-be. I used to be someone who believed that if you gave enough, loved enough, forgave enough, things would work out. I clung to that idea like a lifeline for years, even when Daniel started pulling away. Even when he'd come home late smelling like cologne that didn't belong to either of us. Even when his phone never left his hand, like it was some secret he held tighter than my own hand in public. We'd been married for 11 years. Met at a friend's engagement party. I was fresh out of college, ambitious, terrified, and too hopeful. He was the charming finance guy in a navy suit who made me laugh with a single look. He said I had eyes like a storm and danced with me until my shoes came off. He proposed 2 years later under the tree in my parents' backyard. I remember crying so hard I forgot to say yes out loud. Our life started beautifully. The first apartment was small and noisy, but filled with joy. Saturday mornings meant pancakes and records. We'd dream about kids, traveling to Italy, growing old on a porch swing somewhere quiet. But life has a way of testing people in quiet, cruel ways. When my mom got sick and moved in with us, everything shifted. Daniel tried to be supportive, but slowly I noticed the change. Less eye contact. Less talking. More phone calls taken in other rooms. I blamed stress. The job. Grief. Everything but the truth. And when she passed and I fell into a 6-month fog, I thought he'd be my anchor. But he wasn't. He disappeared even more. Emotionally, then physically. It started with a quick trip to LA for work and then became 3-day weekends with the team. And the more I tried to cling to us, the more he seemed to want space. Like I was too much now. Like the woman he married had become inconvenient. But I never imagined there was someone else. Chelsea was younger. Of course she was. Bright, chirpy, all high heels and motivational quotes on Instagram. I'd seen her at one of his company parties, blonde bob, fake laugh, constantly touching his arm. I remember feeling a strange tightness in my chest when I saw them talking. But I told myself it was nothing. Daniel would never. He wasn't like that. Except he just didn't look like the kind of man who'd cheat. That's the thing people don't tell you. Sometimes betrayal doesn't come from villains. Sometimes it comes from the man who still brings home your favorite chocolate, kisses your forehead out of habit, and tells you he loves you even while planning a weekend getaway with someone else. I first saw the cracks during Christmas. We were hosting and Daniel was unusually tense. Not the typical holiday stress kind, but distant, like he was always waiting for a phone to buzz. He got up from dinner twice to take calls. Claimed they were from clients in Asia, but I noticed the way his face lit up before he walked away. Then came the real blow. January 15th. He was asleep beside me, snoring softly, when his phone lit up at 2:13 a.m. I never checked his messages before. I respected privacy. But something in me, maybe instinct, maybe heartbreak, compelled me to reach for it. It wasn't locked. A mistake he'd regret. The text was from C, and it wasn't innocent. Asterisk, last night was perfect. I still smell you on my skin. Can't wait for next weekend. Asterisk. My hands shook. I stared at it for minutes. Then I scrolled up. Hundreds of messages. Photos. Jokes. Dates planned. Lies unraveled in real time. Each message felt like a stab to the chest, but I kept reading, kept screenshotting, because I needed the truth. The full, ugly, undeniable truth. The next morning I said nothing. I just smiled and made coffee like usual. He kissed my cheek on his way out, and I stood in the kitchen, wondering if I'd ever been anything more than a placeholder in my own marriage. I started therapy a week later. Quietly. Secretly. I needed help untangling myself from the guilt I'd been trained to feel. Because that's what betrayal does. It doesn't just break your heart. It rewrites your memory. You start to question every smile, every I love you, every moment that once felt sacred. But while I worked on myself, I also started planning. Taylor, my cousin and best friend, had always been protective of me. When I told her, she didn't react with shock. She just sighed, like she'd known. "Let's not just walk away," she said. "Let's walk through him. You gave him over a decade. He can give you closure." It was Taylor who first mentioned his boss. "Does he know about Chelsea?" she asked one afternoon while flipping through a binder of emails and messages we had compiled. I shook my head. "He'd never risk it," I said. Langford's old school, strict no fraternizing rule. Her eyes lit up. "That might be our in." We dug deeper. Found out Chelsea had been fast-tracked for a promotion, likely influenced by Daniel. That's when it clicked. This wasn't just personal. It was professional. And it was dangerous for him. Still, part of me didn't want revenge. I wanted an apology, a conversation, something raw and real. But I also knew I'd never get it. Daniel didn't see me as someone he hurt. He saw me as an obstacle to be gently stepped around while building a new life on the side. And Daniel? Well, let's talk about him. He wasn't a monster. That's the hardest part. If he'd been cruel, cold, abusive, I could have hated him cleanly. But he was polite, smart, funny, a good listener, the kind of man people liked instantly, the kind of man who knew how to hide his selfishness behind charm and smooth excuses. From his point of view, I was probably the problem. Distant after my mother's death. Too focused on work. Too sad. Too tired. Too boring. Maybe Chelsea made him feel alive again. Maybe she laughed at his jokes with fresh energy. Maybe he convinced himself he deserved this. That's the dangerous thing about justification. It always starts with tiny betrayals of your own integrity. I saw it in his face when we locked eyes that night at the restaurant. Not guilt. Not regret. Just panic. He knew the walls were crashing. The lies collapsing. Because this time, I hadn't come to cry or plead or scream. I came with my lawyer, his boss, and a manila envelope full of consequences. But the real confrontation was still ahead. And what I didn't know yet, what none of us knew, was that Chelsea had secrets too. Secrets that would turn the night from a dramatic confrontation into a complete unraveling. And I wasn't ready for what would come next. The silence after I walked out of La Verona was thicker than the velvet curtains brushing my shoulder. My heart was racing, not out of fear, but from the electric finality of it all. It was done. I had pulled the curtain back on his perfect little double life in front of the one person who controlled his career and the woman who thought she could replace me. But the fallout? That began the moment the heavy door swung shut behind me. Taylor caught up to me outside. "That," she said, "was a goddamn symphony." I tried to smile, but my legs felt unsteady. I wasn't sure if I wanted to laugh, cry, or throw up. We sat in the car for a few minutes in silence. I watched the glow from the restaurant windows, wondering what was being said in my absence. I could only imagine the scene. Daniel stammering, Chelsea's face crumbling as she realized her promotion was gone, and Mr. Langford quietly gathering the evidence we'd presented in that neat manila envelope. I'd just detonated a truth bomb in the middle of Daniel's carefully curated world. And I hadn't even begun to feel the aftershocks. By morning, they came in waves. Daniel called me 13 times between 2 a.m. and 6 a.m. I didn't answer a single one. His voicemails started angry. What the hell do you think you're doing? Then quickly turned desperate. Lena, please just talk to me. This isn't what you think. The gall of that line nearly made me laugh. I had screenshots of what it was. I had timelines, hotel receipts, voice recordings, a whole timeline of betrayal, and still, he thought he could spin the truth back in his favor. But I didn't respond. I let the silence speak for me. By noon, the situation had grown legs. Taylor texted me a link. Anonymous source tips off CEO about executive misconduct. Investigation underway at Whitmore Capital. The article didn't name names, but anyone in Daniel's world would know exactly who it meant. The story spread fast through corporate circles. Chelsea's LinkedIn quietly vanished that afternoon. So did her access to company servers, and by evening, an internal email leaked confirming she had been suspended pending further investigation. Daniel, meanwhile, had gone underground. No more calls. No texts. Just silence. And still, part of me didn't feel relief. Just a heavy, aching kind of emptiness. Because public disgrace wasn't what I ever wanted for him. I wanted the truth. I wanted justice. But I didn't want to destroy someone I once loved. But when you set fire to a lie, you don't get to control what burns with it. The days that followed felt surreal. I stayed at Taylor's place, surrounded by coffee cups and softly whispered check-ins. I cried quietly into her couch cushions when the grief snuck up on me. Grief not for Daniel, but for the life I'd built around a man who didn't exist anymore. I missed who he used to be, or maybe who I thought he was. I went to therapy twice that week. Once, I sobbed the entire session. The second time, I sat stone-faced and just said, I don't know who I am without him. And that was the real wound. Not losing him, but losing the version of me that was safe, loved, certain. Meanwhile, Daniel was spiraling. I got a call from his sister, Marla. We'd always been close, and she sounded hesitant when she spoke. Lena, she said softly, he's a mess. He's not eating. He got served the papers. He didn't think you'd actually go through with it. That line pissed me off more than anything. Of course he didn't. He'd gotten so used to me forgiving everything, bending, shrinking, explaining away his bad behavior, that the idea of me actually leaving hadn't registered as real. But I didn't need to be the bigger person anymore. I needed to be my own person. Marla understood. She even admitted, through tears, that she'd suspected something was going on, but didn't know how to tell me. He's your brother, I said gently. You loved him too. We all did. A few nights later, Daniel showed up at my doorstep. It was late, just past 10 p.m., and the knock was soft but insistent. Taylor wasn't home. I opened the door, and there he was, dressed in jeans and a wrinkled t-shirt, face sunken with exhaustion. He looked nothing like the confident man from that dinner. Lena, he said, barely above a whisper. Please, can we talk? For a moment, I just looked at him. Really looked. There was no arrogance in his eyes anymore. Just shame, confusion, and maybe a trace of sorrow. I don't think there's anything left to say, I replied. But my voice broke slightly, betraying the tears threatening behind my eyes. I messed up, he said. I know I did. But it wasn't about her. It was, I don't know. I felt like I was disappearing. Like I wasn't enough anymore. And she made me feel seen. That's the line I'll never forget. She made me feel seen, as if I hadn't spent years carrying the weight of his career, his insecurities, his moods, while losing pieces of myself along the way. I saw you, I said. Every day. I saw the best in you when no one else did. And you erased me. He sat down on the porch step, head in his hands. I didn't think you'd leave. That's the problem, I said quietly. We sat in silence. The kind that wraps around old love and grief, like smoke. Then I stood. I hope you find peace, Daniel. I really do. But it won't be with me. and I closed the door gently. Inside, I leaned against the wall and let the tears come. But they were different this time. Not of longing or heartbreak, but release. In the weeks that followed, the story faded from the headlines, but not from people's whispers. I got a few awkward texts from mutual friends, some supportive, some unsure of where to stand. But I didn't care. For the first time, I wasn't measuring my decisions by other people's comfort. I started painting again. Just small pieces, messy and imperfect. I booked a trip to the coast alone, my first solo vacation in years. I met new people. Read books I'd been meaning to finish for years. Relearned how to be with myself. And one afternoon, sitting at a cafe with a sea breeze in my hair and sunlight on my face, I caught myself smiling for no reason. It wasn't revenge that healed me. It wasn't his downfall. It was the rediscovery of my own worth, the quiet triumph of choosing myself after being forgotten. And that was the beginning of everything new. The morning after Daniel showed up at my door, the weight of everything settled in with an unexpected clarity. For so long, I had been caught in a storm of emotions, anger, betrayal, sadness, but now, in the quiet light of dawn, a new feeling emerged. It wasn't relief. It wasn't joy. It was determination. Sitting on the edge of my bed, I pulled out a notebook and began writing, not just to vent, but to map out what I truly wanted. I needed to stop reacting and start leading my own life. This wasn't just about ending a marriage. It was about reclaiming myself piece by piece. I thought back to every time I had silenced my own pain to keep the peace. Every "it's okay," every swallowed tear. It was time to stop living in the shadows of his mistakes. I wasn't going to be a victim or a casualty. I was going to be the author of my own story. The first step was practical. I contacted a divorce attorney, someone strong, experienced, and compassionate. My lawyer, Megan, was a breath of fresh air. She listened to my story with quiet intensity, and together, we began to build a case that was about more than just dividing assets. It was about dignity, respect, and ensuring that the truth was acknowledged, not just by Daniel, but by everyone involved. At the same time, I took a hard look at my finances. Years of prioritizing Daniel's career over mine had left me in a vulnerable position, but I refused to be powerless. I reconnected with an old mentor from design school who encouraged me to start freelancing again. Slowly, I began rebuilding a professional life I'd let slip away. Meanwhile, Daniel's world was crumbling faster than he could manage. Rumors spread beyond the company. Clients pulled contracts. Friends distanced themselves. I heard through Marla that he was struggling with depression, therapy, medication, the works. For the first time, I saw the man behind the facade unraveling, and it complicated the narrative in my mind. I didn't hate him. I just didn't trust him anymore. One afternoon, Megan called me with news that set my heart pounding. The boss, Mr. Langford, had agreed to meet, not just to discuss Chelsea's misconduct, but to talk about Daniel's role in enabling her. It was an opening, a chance to expose the whole tangled web. We decided to attend the meeting together. The conference room was cold, clinical, with glass walls that made every gesture feel exposed. Daniel was already there when we arrived, looking tired, defensive, and surprisingly vulnerable. Langford opened the discussion with a measured tone. This isn't just about one employee's poor judgment. It's about a culture of silence and complicity. We need to address that honestly. Daniel's jaw tightened, but he nodded slowly. I understand, sir. Megan stepped forward. Mr. Wallace, we have evidence showing your direct involvement in promoting Chelsea despite company policies and communications indicating awareness of the inappropriate relationship. Daniel swallowed hard, eyes flickering to me briefly, then away. I made mistakes, he admitted, voice low. I allowed my personal feelings to cloud my judgment. It was a confession, but also a fracture, a crack in his armor I hadn't seen before. Later, when Megan and I were alone, I reflected on how far I'd come. From the woman who silently suffered in a marriage of lies to someone who was fighting for her own voice. But the path ahead was uncertain. That night, I went to a local support group, a circle of women who had survived betrayals, heartbreak, and broken promises. Sharing my story aloud was terrifying, but it was also freeing. Their nods, their tears, their fierce courage lit a fire inside me I hadn't known I still had. As I left, the group's leader gave me a hug and said, "You're not alone, and you're stronger than you think." I carried that strength into every meeting, every phone call, every difficult conversation. Meanwhile, Daniel's doubts deepened. I heard from Marla that he was trying to make amends, sending letters, reaching out to mutual friends, even attending therapy sessions regularly. But the man who had once been so sure of himself was now fragile and unsure. The power had shifted, and with it came his regret. One night, Daniel called me again. "Lena, I'm sorry," he said simply. No excuses. No justifications. Just raw, honest regret. I listened, and for a moment, I felt the old pull, the years of shared memories, the love that once was. But I also felt the new me, the woman who refused to be undone. "I forgive you," I said softly, "but I won't go back. We're both different now." He paused. "I know." The next pivotal moment came when the divorce papers were filed. Walking into the courthouse with Megan beside me, I felt an odd mix of relief and sorrow. The chapter was ending, but a new one was beginning. In that moment, I realized that the greatest act of courage wasn't confronting Daniel at that dinner. It wasn't filing the papers or exposing the affair. It was choosing to live for myself, on my own terms, with my own voice. And as I stepped out into the sunlight, I knew the story was far from over. But this time, I was ready to write it. The day of the final hearing arrived with an almost surreal stillness. The courthouse buzzed quietly with the usual shuffle of lawyers, clerks, and anxious clients, but inside me, a tempest churned. Months of heartache, late nights poring over documents, stolen moments of doubt and strength, all had led to this pivotal moment where the past and future collided. As Megan and I sat in the sterile waiting room, I felt a strange calm settle over me. This wasn't just about legal papers or dividing assets anymore. This was about reclaiming my dignity, my voice, and my future. Daniel arrived shortly after, flanked by his own attorney. His eyes met mine briefly, a flicker of regret, maybe apology, but mostly exhaustion. Gone was the polished executive I once knew, replaced by a man who looked stripped bare by his own mistakes. Yet beneath that, I sensed a quiet recognition that this ending was necessary, not just for me, but for him too. The judge called us into the courtroom, and as we took our seats, I thought back to all the moments that had brought me here. The betrayal, the confrontation at the restaurant, the long nights of therapy, and the steady rebuilding of myself. But I also remembered the small sparks of humanity I glimpsed in Daniel, the pain, the remorse, the vulnerability. It was these complexities that made the final showdown not just a legal battle, but a deeply personal reckoning. The hearing began with the formal reading of the charges, the recounting of the affair, and the presentation of evidence. Megan spoke with quiet confidence, her voice steady, but imbued with the weight of truth. She detailed not only the betrayal, but also the patterns of behavior that had eroded the trust and respect between us. Daniel's attorney tried to minimize the damage, framing it as a lapse in judgment, a momentary weakness. But the evidence was unyielding. When it was Daniel's turn to speak, he rose slowly, his voice tentative but honest. "I stand here not to deny what I have done, but to acknowledge it. I have caused pain to Lena, to my family, and to myself. I ask not for forgiveness today, but for understanding that I am committed to change." Hearing those words stirred something unexpected in me. It wasn't absolution, but it was a beginning, a first step toward healing that neither of us could achieve alone. I realized that the story we had lived wasn't simply about betrayal or revenge. It was about two people lost in the wreckage of their own making, struggling to find their way back to themselves. When the judge ruled in my favor, granting the divorce with fair terms and stipulations for future boundaries, I felt a wave of relief wash over me. The weight I had carried for so long lifted just enough to let me breathe freely for the first time in years. After the hearing, Daniel and I met quietly in a small cafe nearby. There were no accusations, no recriminations, just two people attempting to make peace with the past. "Thank you," he said softly, "for standing your ground, for being strong." I smiled, a genuine warmth blooming inside. "Thank you for facing the truth. It's the hardest thing to do." We talked about the future, his plans for therapy and rebuilding his life, my ambitions to grow my career and reclaim my independence. It wasn't a promise to reconcile as a couple, but a mutual respect for the journeys we were each undertaking. Walking away from that cafe, I felt lighter, freer, and more myself than I had in years. The scars of the past would remain, but they no longer defined me. I had chosen to transform pain into power, betrayal into clarity, and loss into hope. In the weeks that followed, I threw myself into my work and passions. My freelance projects blossomed, and new friendships formed on honest, steady ground. I traveled to the coast again, this time with a new sense of purpose and peace. Standing by the ocean's edge, I watched the waves roll in and out, each one a reminder that life moves forward, carrying with it the chance to heal and grow. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, I received a letter from Daniel. He wrote about his progress, the therapy sessions, and how he was learning to confront his flaws rather than hide them. He expressed a hope, not for us to reunite, but that we might someday find friendship and forgiveness. I folded the letter carefully, feeling a quiet smile tug at my lips. Forgiveness was a gift I could give, not for him, but for myself. And in that moment, I knew that my story was no longer defined by the betrayal or the divorce. It was defined by the courage it took to stand up, walk away, and choose a new path. Because sometimes, the most powerful love story is the one we write for ourselves.